thank you for everybody coming out. We have a distinguished panel. Before we go around, I'd like to just introduce ourselves a little bit more. I'm the editorial page editor at the Journal Gazette. I've been there for a year now, and prior to that, I was at Fort Wayne Magazine and at InkSpot at the same time. So now I'm able to, not work two jobs but one. So, but I've lived here for 18 years here in Fort Wayne, coming up on 19 in August. So, and live in the Southwood Park neighborhood.
Shirley Rourke. I work for Just Neighbors. It's an emergency shelter for families in Fort Wayne. A year ago, we launched a program for eviction interventions trying to prevent homelessness. And we work closely with Indiana Legal Services and Allen County Small Claims Court to try and prevent people from being evicted. About half of our time is spent at the courthouse. We find that working directly with the tenants and the landlords at that point seems to have a better turnout. And this program has actually just had its year anniversary, but during that time, we don't have exact numbers, but about 48% evictions, so almost cut in half since we launched the program. So I think that's pretty huge. And partnership with the courts has seemed to change the way they've handled evictions. I think we have been able to point out things to them they may not have been aware of that were happening. And they've been very welcoming to us, so that's really turned out to be a great thing. And hopefully we continue to grow and work with more landlords in the city and see if we can prevent it even further upstream.
I am Raina Bradley. I'm a neighborhood planner at the City of Fort Wayne as of this past July. My former professional life here, I was working at Bridge of Grace Compassionate Ministries, which is a faith-based nonprofit that focuses on neighborhood revitalization in Southeast Fort Wayne. Before that, I was working at the Detroit Land Bank Authority, and before that, I was working on large hospitals in Virginia. So that is my professional background. I'm originally from Southfield, Michigan, just north and west of Detroit, by way of Indianapolis, by way of Las Vegas, by way of now Fort Wayne. So move a bit professionally, move a bit personally. I've been here for 7 years now, and I'm spending a lot of time developing neighborhood development tools and resources for our neighborhood leaders to hopefully begin to build upon the knowledge base and skill set that I developed at Bridge of Grace while I was working there.
And I'm Dan Baisden. I'm also a neighborhood planner with the City of Fort Wayne, Community Development Division. And before this, I spent a little bit of time in Kalamazoo, Michigan for a few months. And before that, I was actually here at the City of Fort Wayne again. So I was the former public art manager for the city. And then prior to that, I spent time as an executive director of a Main Street organization in Ohio. I have a few years of experience working in radio broadcasting. And my background primarily was in radio for several years. I decided to switch out and go into urban planning. Also have a degree in sociology and just finished my master's in community development administration earlier this year. So I've got a little bit of a different background going from communications into cities and urban environments, but I'm really excited to be able to put the things I've learned into practice here at the City of Fort Wayne.
All right, well, let's get started. On questions. I looked up did some research on the idea of healthy neighborhoods and what a healthy neighborhood is. And I kept running across a Wendell Berry quote, and I love Wendell Berry, great poet, great writer. And it's, a garden is a solution that leads to other solutions. It is part of the limitless pattern of good health and good sense. So for each of you, how do you define a healthy neighborhood? And are there models here in town or in other places, maybe Kalamazoo, that sort of fit that idea of a healthy neighborhood?
From my perspective, stability. If people feel like they're stable in a neighborhood, they take more pride in their home and their neighborhood, they look out for their neighbors more. I think that is a big part. Even if you're a renter, if you feel like you're going to be in that home for a while and you get to know your neighbors and you feel more comfortable and you feel safe, then you stay. And I think that builds stability in a neighborhood.
Go ahead.
Dan?
I think one of the biggest things that I see is the importance, the role of social connectivity, social capital, being able to build relationships and being able to solve problems together. And that's really, and creating solutions together. I think that's really important for creating healthy neighborhoods. You can't do it alone necessarily, so it's important to work together and build relationships and be able to work on creating a healthy neighborhood together.
Hmm. And I feel like healthy neighborhoods are extremely multifaceted, so there's any number of things that should be in them, that should not be in them, in order to make them that way. So a lot of people will think about when it comes to like bricks and mortar, having great streets, sidewalks, infrastructure, et cetera, access to amenities. But when you look at what draws people to neighborhoods and what helps them stay, when Fort Wayne was pulled back in 2010, what we said is that we wanted our neighborhoods to be more beautiful. We said we wanted them to feel more welcome, that there were examples of pride. We wanted them to be safe, and to know that they're safe, and for them to be inclusive. So I think at the end of the day, when you think about healthy neighborhoods, they have to be spaces with healthy people and thriving relationships.
Okay, with that in mind, are there any neighborhoods that you could point to that you say, well, yeah, that's kind of what we believe and look at as a healthy neighborhood?
For myself, I mean, I feel like I'm always going to be promoting Mount Vernon Park because
Yeah.
I love it there. That's the neighborhood I've lived and worked in for the past 7 years. And it was a neighborhood that I don't think a lot of people would have considered healthy 10 years ago. There was a proliferation of crime that definitely made it feel unsafe. A lot of the interior home environments and exterior home environments were unsafe. Sidewalks weren't passable for people walking and or people in motorized wheelchairs. And then 7 years later, 10 years later, really, we've seen crime fall 65%. We've seen the neighbors get more engaged. Now the kids leave their bikes all over the sidewalks and their scooters all over the sidewalks because they know they're safe and they're not going anywhere. And so you see the evidence of people being more safe, feeling more safe, in the use of the neighborhood itself. And I think Mount Vernon Park's a good example of the people themselves having an opportunity to drive that change and to be the catalyst for that change within their community. So I think I don't like the word empowering, but letting people know that they're allowed to do that work and that others are willing to walk alongside them throughout the process of getting it done, provides a lot of stability and continuity, helps build momentum, and really helps equip people to do that work. Yeah.
We have 454 neighborhood associations in the city. Not all of them are necessarily active, and that makes it really kind of a challenging number at times. So I could sit there and list all 400 plus of them, but I think that's in Fort Wayne we have so many that are starting to rise to the occasion in different levels and different respects. I think like Bloomingdale, for example, just north of downtown. We have a great president there who's really trying to make some positive impacts with the business association on Wells Street, and then also doing some work with the neighborhood nearby, working on building a playground, things like that. But then we also have some great neighborhoods in the Packard area, directly south of downtown, and northeast. We have Northside and Forest Park and North Anthony, and so every one of them, and southeast, we're working in Harvester. And so there's so many different associations across the city that are trying to meet the challenges and needs where they are and be able to work with them and support them in their growth.
I agree. I was thinking back when, if it takes a good group of association people who want to be involved and want and can advocate for themselves, I know most people just think that my voice doesn't count. I'm just, one person among them. But your voice really does count. It really makes an impact. And it's meetings where you meet with the average, homeowner or renter, and they say, hey, you don't know everything. So bringing those things, up helps you be able to address those and look into those things. So it takes a strong voice from the people who live in the neighborhood, I think, to be able to make those changes. And I think also different associations working with each other because they have, they have a collective goal. And when they work together, they accomplish a lot more. And I'm seeing that a lot more in Fort Wayne lately, at least from my perspective. And I think that's made a lot of great changes in the past 5 years.
Why do you think that's become more important as you've lived here over the last 5 years? Well, what has changed?
I think that the city has done a good job of letting people know that their voice counts and matters and can make a difference. So those people are speaking up, and as those people speak up, other people see them. And then it's just, word of mouth passing around, and everybody's feeling like their voice counts. And the city, I believe, is enabling them to do that and listening, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I remember how important Packard and a bunch of other neighborhoods were in both promoting Electric Works as well as saying, we're going to hold you accountable for trying to keep these neighborhoods as organic as possible without, you know, exploding the, uh, co- you know, uh, the cost of living there. Do you think that's working? Are all three of you um, hesitant about, you know, the development of downtown and, people moving back downtown and, thus, raising property rates and taxes and things like that? I hate to say gentrification, but yeah, let's just be honest and say, do we really want to gentrify Fort Wayne?
I think the thing that we see is when we work in community engagement, and that is meeting people, having those conversations, being able to listen and understand their needs and their wants and their concerns, and being able to distill that into information that we can use at the city. It's got to start there. Fort Wayne is the fastest growing, or one of the fastest growing metros in the entire Great Lakes region, and being able to be a city that meets those challenges and those needs is really important. So that requires the city has to adjust with it. It can't necessarily be the same city it was in the 1980s or 1950s. So understanding what those are and making sure that the community is a part of that conversation is really important.
Did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Sure. I'm deciding what. Um, I think development is always going to be a double-edged sword. I think that's just the case. When I lived in DC, there was rapid development. When I lived in Detroit, there was rapid development. And of course, there are conversations then about gentrification, specifically about displacement. For myself, lexicon matters. The types of words you use matter. So for myself, gentrification, as the definition I understand of it, and if you Google it, you'll discover 30 different definitions of gentrification. So the Raina Bradley working version of gentrification is rising education and income levels within an area. So gentrification in and of itself, by that definition, is not something that I think is terribly problematic. What becomes problematic is when that happens because one group of people is displaced or pushed out involuntarily by property values, evictions, things of that nature. Thinking of our underserved neighborhoods, my concern becomes making sure that there's opportunity for the people who want to stay, to be able to do so. And I know that we as a city are really starting to think a lot about the affordability of housing and how people of different income levels can be able to stay within their communities. And I know that, people in our housing department and OH&S are very pro mixed income communities and neighborhoods and pro doing work to make sure that all of our city becomes more mixed income, more integrated in that way, so that we can have more economic diversity, and more opportunity for everyone in that way. So I think it is coming down the pike. We all see the property values rising. I don't think that's something that we can deny. But I hope that we're able to provide proper opportunity for people to be able to still live affordably. And affordably just means because some people raise pitchforks subsidized housing. Affordable housing is just housing that costs 30% or less of someone's gross income. So if you're making $2 million, it's still 30% or less of your gross income. If you're making $20,000, it's 30% or less of your gross income. In Fort Wayne, because our property values have been relatively low compared to the national average, we've had what a lot of us have called naturally occurring affordable housing for a very long time. But now we're in a case where that's dissipating because there's such a demand for property here. So with growth comes certain issues, certain problems. But I do think, from what I've seen, our city staff is aware of that. And I think a lot of developers and other folk are aware of that and beginning to make moves to hopefully get out in front of it.
Well, I think one of the, Dan mentioned, we're the fastest growing metro in
The Great Lakes region.
which is a great thing. And, Fort Wayne has gotten a lot of press and attention. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people buying properties and raising rents, which leads back to a situation that you have to deal with. Indiana's just not Indiana's a very very landlord friendly state. Can you kind of talk to that and maybe what can the local government and what can the state government do in order to help maybe level a playing field, to use a really cliche. Yeah. Can you answer in 30 seconds? That was setting up.
The average rent hike right now is $400. I've tenant after tenant after tenant.
Yeah.
It was 600 up to 1,000. It was 800. It's up to 1,200. And as you know, people's income is increasing with the cost of living. Like gallon milk, everything is increasing. So what housing is available in Fort Wayne is not affordable. So anytime I get the chance, huge advocate for subsidized housing. I'm not housing choice vouchers, I'm not asking anybody to let somebody live there for free. Just make it affordable. Like she said, 30%, some are 40, 50, depending on what kind of funding you get. But then it's 30% of their income, whatever it is. And when people's income gets back up there with, the cost of living, then you can adjust that. But there is not affordable housing in Fort Wayne. I don't have the numbers, but imagine somebody living on Social Security. Their income can never change. It might go up $10 a year, but it's not going to change. So it doesn't matter what the rent is. They can't afford it. So the only place they're going to be able to live is if they own or if they're subsidized housing. There's no other options for them. And I think that's one of the focuses we need to have in Fort Wayne, especially around the housing crisis. Even with evictions, there's 200 applicants for every unit. And if it's not affordable, it's going to lead to further evictions. So we need subsidized housing very greatly in a big way right now. It's, I think, an emergency level. We're going to see the population homelessness is going to increase, people's health, kids. I mean, imagine if you have to switch schools, constantly. Of course, you're not going to be able to keep up with school and social, and there's so many aspects to that. So if we do not do something now, it's going to not only impact a year from now, 2 years from now, but for, the next generation as they're growing up. And it's just a crisis that needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
Does you have anything to add to that?
That's specific.
Which brings me
I
to.
didn't answer your question. I'm so sorry.
No, actually you did. Yeah. No.
I didn't even mention landlords at all. Okay.
Well, you and I have talked about, how the state is very landlord friendly, and it's not to say that every landlord is bad, but clearly there are some bad actors. I mean, is there? What can the state do in order to help? Again, level that playing field. I mean.
We've talked about rent caps, and I'm kind of in with that because I think a landlord owns a property. They have a right to name whatever rent they want. If you don't want to live there, don't live there. So, but at the same time, I don't think it's fair to up someone because there's nowhere for them to live. So I don't have the solution to that. But I think that evictions, if someone gets evicted, they just increase it from 10 to 20 days, but they get a 20-day notice of court. And if they're evicted, they have 7 days after that. So if you can't afford to pay your rent, you can't afford to, one, find a new place with eviction on your record, or come up with first month's rent deposit and move within 27 days. So I think, and that's in Allen County. They don't have to give any time. You can go to court, you have to be out today, but in Allen County, they give them 7 days. Other counties do not give that. So we're quite lucky in Allen County, but a longer time to be able to vacate, some kind of mediation beforehand, which they have just done that in Allen County as well, which has helped. They've made a lot of changes in Allen County in the last year that's helped the tenant more. They now have a double court hearing that used to only have one, and they've made some other changes. But landlords need to be held accountable for houses that aren't livable.
That's what you meant.
And one thing that I like is the local magistrates at the damages phase of an eviction, which is when they determine how much the tenant owes the landlord for back rent or damages, whatever. The judges will adjust how much the tenant owes the landlord if there was, like, you couldn't use one of the bathrooms, or you couldn't use one of the bedrooms, or it wasn't livable for. But that doesn't solve the problem of when they're living there, and tenants are
Right.
afraid to call code, because if the house is considered condemned, the tenant has to leave until the property's fixed or it doesn't get fixed. Where are they gonna go? So they're scared to call anybody to say, hey, come look at my house, it's not livable. So I just think landlords need to be held much more accountable for how property is taken care of, especially when they're renting it to people and expecting them to live in it and pay rent.
Well, this kind of brings me back to something I read today. It was a piece in The Atlantic called Housing Breaks People's Brains. And I'll read a section of it that I thought was very interesting, which kind of gets back to the idea of not enough housing. Despite the avalanche of agreement from experts, the general public still doubts cause and effect. A new study from a trio of professors at the University of California reveals that shortage denialism is not the only missing shared fact plaguing housing discourse. The researchers ran 2 nationwide surveys of urban and suburban residents and found that 30 to 40% of Americans believe, contrary to basic economic theory and robust empirical evidence, quote, that if a lot of the new housing were built in their region, then rents and home prices would rise. This posture is referred to as supply skepticism. Shortage denialism, which I have observed in my own reporting, and supply skepticism, which these researchers revealed through their survey data, are related phenomena. Not only are they false, but they are false in the same direction. They push against the actual solution to the housing crisis: build enough homes. After all, if there's no shortage, or if building new homes doesn't reduce rent, then no one has to tackle NIMBYism. No one has to work to bring down housing construction costs, and no one needs to build millions of new homes in America's cities and suburbs. In fact, this magical thinking goes, we can fix our housing crisis without changing much of anything at all. So with that in mind, uh, and responding to that quote, I mean, does this really come down to if we build more affordable homes? Because clearly we're building a lot of homes in the, suburban, and I'm just misusing suburban, but yeah, the more affluent neighborhoods, but not enough new housing in the city, or and maybe even not enough housing, out near Pine Valley that might be affordable. So I mean, does this really come down to let's just build more, and that will drive prices down, or is this maybe a shortcoming of the writer?
I think, wow, there's a lot there, but I think one of the biggest things is, we have to recognize the 2 largest generations in world history are currently alive right now. So millennials and the boomer generation, and so that's a mass population that we've never dealt with as
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I was just going to say, knowing that there's just more people on the planet than ever before, so we have to have homes for people.
Well, as a
Um,
Gen Xer, I have to say, we try our best to not have enough kids, and I blame everybody else for our problems. So go ahead. But
No, but I think there's something really important to recognize there, is that we just have more people, and the housing tastes are maybe a little bit different than they used to be too. The idea of everybody's going to have 2.3 kids just is not necessarily true anymore. And so what kind of housing are we building is really important. And to note that we have a lot of urban infill available in the city. So what does that look like? And how do we try to approach ensuring that there's additional urban infill? So we are building houses in existing neighborhoods that already have strong support systems, or building housing in neighborhoods where we could build stronger support systems, I think is really a kind of an important first step to consider as a city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm still a bit baffled by the statistic, and so I'm trying to that 30 to 40% of people within our country think that adding more housing stock will actually increase housing value. All I can imagine, so I'm trying to, who would be the person that says that? What I can imagine is that the person who's living in a like single level, ranch style home is really afraid of the McMansion popping up next door that's going to raise their property values. I mean, the good news is that we have a lot of options when it comes to housing offerings. And we can increase density. We can have multi-family, like duplex units, triplex units, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that don't necessarily have to raise property values. But I mean, it's a simple like economics question at the end of the day. Usually more supply means lower value. I think in Fort Wayne, what's tricky is that people have like discovered Fort Wayne. These articles about us being number one hipster city and things like this exist. And it's resulted in, he understands my sense of humor, in us having this influx of people, which is creating more demand. I went to a presentation earlier this week where Greater Fort Wayne was talking about the fact that more people, I think we've had something like 7,500 people come into the city this year overall. That's our net population increase. And I remember the year I moved here, we were celebrating around 2017 or so. We were celebrating the fact that for the first time in decades, we had 2 more people at the end of the year than we had at the beginning of the year. You know what I mean? And so that 7,500 compared to that 2 is a huge number. And so we're just not accustomed to providing additional housing for people coming in because we're not used to people coming in. And in markets, it is normal that when more people who have more money, who are accustomed to paying higher prices, come into your market, the prices will go up. So I think that increased demand is there. And I kind of understand like all these people are coming around, they're going to drive all our values up. Maybe that's the logic or rationale. But yes, overall, as long as we're providing additional units that are well suited for the income levels that exist within our community and not just for the newer folk who are coming in who may, as you said, be more affluent, then overall providing more housing can and should help to keep the values where they should be. Also, there is a need for subsidized housing, and to make sure that we do something to make sure the values don't rise so much for the people who are within our communities that they can no longer afford them. And there are other tools available to us to help out with that kind of thing as well, especially for homeowners and the elderly, that we can think about beginning to put into play. And I know the current administration also just passed some new rules in that big what is it?
Build back better.
Thank you. Build back. We still aren't.
Yeah, I've the Biden
That
administration.
package, the Biden administration's package that they put out, there's a lot of new tools in there that I know that we're starting to become more familiar with and look at so that we can have more options to make sure that we provide what needs to be there. So if you do build all McMansions in really underserved neighborhoods, I can understand that fear. But overall, if we're providing what needs to be provided at the income levels that are appropriate, providing more housing stock should help keep the values where they're supposed to be.
I agree. Absolutely. It's appropriate housing in the correct neighborhood. You can't build a mansion next to, a house that's $12,000 and there's a $300,000 house. As long as, and we saw that 10 years ago, but where there's appropriate housing in the right neighborhood, I think that's absolutely what we need.
Let's get back to neighborhoods and the idea of helping neighborhoods. There's a writer and mental health clinician named Caitlin Grossman at the University of Michigan. She recently wrote, "Neighborhoods can be places that plant the seed of social change and openness into children so that they will want to work toward a just and kind society." What role does the education system play in creating a healthy neighborhood?
I mean, I love that notion. I think that was a beautiful quote. Thank you for finding that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's cliche to say the kids are our future, but they are our future and they're our present. With the work, I'll just speak to my past life that I did in Mount Vernon Park with our youth. I mean, it's incredible to see the potential of our youth. It's incredible to see how much intellect they have, how much promise they have, what they're capable of achieving if you just create that standard. And they have beautiful visions for their communities, what they can be, what they can become, and they're very willing because they're not jaded like the rest of us, to jump in and to make it those things happen. Um, when I think about including children and how that affects justice or education, I think I think it's kind of like a duh statement that education has an impact on prosperity and opportunity and access to opportunity within our communities. Um, it's important that our kids are equipped to have a good, solid education. Early childhood education is incredibly important, not just for the kids thriving, but also for their families thriving. I think it was in the Alice report that when families were provided with high quality, affordable early childhood education, that an unexpected but pleasant side effect of that was that those households gained more income because the families were able to go out and work. They weren't worried about the safety or and well-being of their children anymore. So pleasant unintended consequences of taking one right step. Going back to that first quote you have of good solutions make better solutions. They solve multiple problems without even meaning to. Um, but forgive me, and I got off on my own tangent. But so early education is incredibly important, but I also think education that allows youth to be creative, realize their own creative potential, and really, practice problem solving and not just regurgitation is important. And I say that from my own educational experience. I went to very different schools at very different times. And there was one school site where I went to where it was just reiterate, regurgitate, reiterate, regurgitate. And there was another that said, okay, when we talk about history, we're not talking about what color so-and-so's horse was. You don't have to regurgitate that back to me. What you need to tell me is why you think this conflict started. What could have mitigated it? How can we move through that differently? And I think taking children through very practical, pragmatic problem solving processes helps them understand cause and effect differently, and it helps them see themselves differently as potential agents of change rather than kind of robots who regurgitate information. And I think that's essential to creating thriving communities with problem solvers who are ready to get in there and be agents of change. Furthermore, I think being in a neighborhood that's thriving and safe and well, and that's investing in its youth, creates an emotional bond with those youth, to give them an opportunity or make them even perceive that they would want to come back to those communities eventually if they leave for higher education or something to that effect and do good work. People tend to, I think, go to places where they feel welcome and they stay where they feel valued. And so helping our youth feel valued, and providing them with that type of experience, I think, is incredibly important. Otherwise, we can create situations where our youth feel like their success is best exemplified by the fact that they've been able to leave.
Right. It kind of gets back to that idea that, what Dan probably be good too, is
Sure.
that we tend to siloize things. At least I grew up in a generation of silos. So there's the school, and there's the church, and there's the home, where we now know that the most successful places, it seems, are very, are like organisms. So that, your education, the education system sort of feeds into, the well-being of the community. The church feeds into the well-being of the community. Sometimes not even from a theological standpoint, but just sometimes just being a gathering place, a gathering point. Coffee shops, retail being the same types of things. With that in mind, how do you get these disparate groups to work together? There are some great neighbors. I was thinking of Packard. I live in Southwood Park. Woohoo, 07. It's not that I don't like 05 because I really do, but they work really well together. How do you, but how can we grow that around the city in other places where maybe it doesn't work quite as well?
I think, we have to, when it comes to neighborhoods, they can't operate like silos, because they've been allowed to operate like silos for so long. Almost encouraged, not encouraged, but just like that there was really no support system there. And so trying to bring neighborhoods together in a positive way, I think is really important, even though they may have disparate ideas of what that is. We use the model ABCD, which is asset-based community development. So instead of just trying to solve problems, you're trying to link to solutions. And you're building off of your existing assets, not trying to say, I want a Target on my street. I would love to go shop at Target on my street too, but what about the corner store? That can be a really great asset. So starting and linking your assets together are really important. So that's the churches, that's the schools, the parks, the libraries, the corner shops, the coffee shops, all that kind of thing. But then it's also the human capital part of the asset building, and that's Joe down the street can fix a engine, and Molly's really good at baking things for people in the hospital, and being able to find those assets and linking those together too. So, I think building a healthy neighborhood, and it starts with building coalitions of people with strengths, rather than focusing exclusively maybe on a weakness.
Yeah, when I hear the word coalition, I always like the word that I know some people kind of tense up. Oh, coalition, it's bad. But do you have anything to add to that? Just the idea of, trying to create maybe, I'm thinking some of the people that you work with are people who are not homeowners, but people who, rent. And how do you get them involved in a community where they think, okay, I'm just a renter, I'm just here, and I don't have a say?
I think when you get anybody who's financially insecure, their focus is on how am I going to feed my kids, how am I going to pay my rent, so they don't have the capacity to worry about, oh, let's go have a meeting about the sidewalks. So for renters, it's much harder because they're not as stable as people who own their homes or have more of a median income. So I think to get those people involved, you have to offer programs or options that are focused, that are free, that are, going to give their kids something where they don't have to take care of them while it's going on. Nobody wants to go somewhere and have the kids be rambunctious. And so you have to offer them opportunities for them to attend things that are appealing to what is going on in their life. So you'd have to offer childcare, something to eat, and prizes, something. That's why I think churches work so well, because they invite anyone, come as you are. They offer meals, they offer, someone to talk to, and they offer things that not other places may offer. Going to a neighborhood meeting, they have childcare for that. I mean, we used to always offer childcare for ours because we knew that might be a hindrance for people coming, and something warm to drink, and maybe a movie for the kids. I just think you have to offer something that's going to appeal to the type of people that you're trying to invite to it.
Yeah, you worked at Visit Village at
Yes.
one point too. So yeah, you've worked with groups of people who have gone from being homeless to people who are sort of re-entering into the market, trying to build credit. How important is for people who don't know, how important is building credit in terms of just not only maybe renting, but just even trying to maybe one day own a home?
I think that needs to be a much more important part of school and education. They need to teach about credit and bills and taxes and how important it is. But if you're raised in an environment or a home where that's never a subject, I was never raised that way. We never talked about credit or, taxes or savings or anything like that. So if you're raised in that type of environment, how are you going to know about it? You learn a lot of things you don't learn from home at school. If it's not taught at school, then you have to wait till you're an adult and you mess up something major and then you learn about it. So for those people who, might not be financially stable, if there are more opportunities to, I love Habitat for Humanity. I think that's a phenomenal program, and God bless them, but they are just not nearly big enough for the need. So I think there's more opportunities out there for ownership, but you got to meet people where they're at. Not everybody, has 650 credits or has that money to put down on a house. So it's, okay, we'll give you $5,000 put down on a home if you do these credit building classes 2 hours a week for 3 months. You know, it has to be something that they're able to do and is going to help them achieve something in the end. And I think those meetings that we could offer people in the neighborhood, if those kind of opportunities arose, I mean, I would have jumped on that, you know, the first 10 years of my adulthood, because that wasn't something I knew how to attain myself. So if it was offered to me, I think that's something that I would have definitely done it, and I think there would be a lot more home ownership, because everybody wants to own a home. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, most people do. They just don't know how to get there, and they were never taught how to get there. So I think if those opportunities were offered, there would be a lot more homeowners out there. I apologize, I have to leave.
Oh, no.
Thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that real
Yeah,
quick?
please
too?
do.
I think one of the other important things too is just making sure tenants are involved in neighborhood conversations too.
Right.
You know, a lot of times it's we've seen there's situations where maybe it's like, well, they're a tenant, they're going to be here for a year or two, but they're there for a year or two, and they should be maybe at the table sometimes too when it comes to meetings about, you know, we want to work on this park in our neighborhood. What things can we do? They also live in the neighborhood too, so just making sure tenants are a part of that conversation, because then they can maybe build relationships with other people in the neighborhood that are going to help them get to where they want to be.
Well, as practitioners of, you know, community development and, you know, understanding urban planning, seeing how that process works, I'm kind of interested in like how the pandemic may affect how we think about neighborhoods and our neighbors. I mean, this is, for most of us, the most disruptive thing we've ever lived through. If you're living in a war-torn area, like, let's say, you know, the Ukraine, that's probably added on the pressure. So I'm just thinking about here specifically in the United States. In terms of disruption, do you think the pandemic made us think differently about neighborhoods, the importance of them? Do you see it in maybe the way people are writing or thinking about urban planning for the future, or neighborhoods for the future?
You want to answer the second part of that?
I can answer the second part if you want to
Yeah.
do the first part.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. I guess the first part is first then. When it comes to how the pandemic affected the neighborhoods, and at least for what I saw, how it affected Fort Wayne in general, is that I saw the urgency of crisis appeared. You know, so I feel like we saw a lot of cash mobilized very quickly. We saw a lot of collaboration happen very quickly, where before maybe there would have been meetings to have meetings about the thing, to have a discussion. And there was just such a level of urgency that things had to get done. And they did get done very quickly. Most of my experience from it came with, again, the organization I used to work with. But I also feel like the pandemic brought to light or shed more light on a lot of pre-existing issues that were exacerbated, and help people to realize, oh, you know, I am only one paycheck away from this situation. Maybe we should be investing more, thinking more about our homeless folks. I am, you know, it's very easy for me to fall behind on my utilities. It's very easy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there were just so many issues that I felt like that shed light on, that we began to react toward as a community very, very quickly, and partner with one another in ways that we hadn't before very, very quickly. That's the big shift I saw. And so I felt like, at least from what I experienced, a lot of organizations came out of, not out of, we're still in the pandemic, but out of 2020, I'll say, with new partners, new focus, new realization that a lot of us have shared vision, and that we can actually realize a lot of efficiencies with one another, either when it comes to staff, resources, etc., in order to get things done. And I think it killed a bit of that crabs in a barrel syndrome for us, at least momentarily, of saying, well, if you get the money, then I don't. It's like there's more than enough problems to go around right now that we can all jump into and solve. And I think it did shift that mindset a bit and pushed us toward push us further down that continuum of collaboration in ways that I've not seen anything else here do
So
since
hopefully,
I've been here.
I was gonna say, hopefully we're not going back to, well, everything's fine now, so let's go back to.
Yeah, let me just
meeting
call
after
you right
meeting
back
after
down
meeting.
again.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I did.
You know, I think on the urban planning side, we've seen a lot more push towards understanding the impacts of public health. And so that's, you know, a multitude of things. It's ranges from access to healthcare to access to healthy food to access to, you know, open spaces and parks and greenways and things that you can go out and explore and be able to have some of that open, fresh air and things like that that are really important. But also connectivity to those other resources in the community too. So, you know, whether it be other nonprofits or churches or organizations, but finding ways to make sure that public health is kind of a front and center approach whenever we do planning. You know, open space, I think, is just overall has generally improved. We're trying to see more of that. And then making sure that our open space is valued appropriately too. So it's, you know, if we're installing or we're putting money towards building open space, that it's truly designed by members of the community. What do they need to access? The city recently has done a couple of investments, one being Powell Park, which is a small park on Pontiac Street, which is really fascinating and great to see this park come to life. And that's really kind of the dream of the neighborhood. And so seeing places like that. And then, you know, overall just connectivity, getting to know. And this has been, you know, when you're locked up in your home for almost a year and a half, or a year, or however it might have been if you were staying inside, you had to rely on relationships that were right around the corner, more so than ever before. You couldn't necessarily go, you know, on a trip maybe as often, and so getting to know your neighbors was really important. And so I think in understanding building off of assets is kind of one of the things that we're seeing more in planning.
We'll open it up to questions from the floor. If you ask a question, just state your name and tell us what neighborhood you live in, if it's here in what way. Yeah.
My name's Maddie. I'm curious how the city is thinking intentionally about developing climate resilient communities. So I'm thinking about, you know, that's not something that is such, it doesn't have that weighted and urgency that pandemic has, but obviously it has the same weight and urgency that just isn't felt in the same way. So like, how is the city thinking about that and planning intentionally and working with communities to do that?
I think our All-in-Allen comprehensive plan that's going to be going through the next couple of months through adoption process and starting implementation, it does cover some of that. And I think really focusing on resiliency in the sense of what resources do we currently have and how do we expand those, versus continuing to dilute resources is kind of a first positive step. I mean, one of the great things about being in the Great Lakes or the Midwest is the fact that we do have so many fantastic natural resources nearby. So how do we harness those in a positive way with minimal disruption, I think is really important. And that's something that the planning department, both at the county and city level, have been really trying to work on, and ensuring that's there for several generations to come.
I think we've also been good about using our public infrastructure as ways to kind of buffer us from some of the poor effects of climate change. So when you see parks like Promenade Park or the other phases of riverfront development that are coming up, a lot of those are flood mitigating public infrastructure. You know, so rather than put an apartment building or a house or allow development right up to the surface of the rivers, we've created public amenities out of things that can also help mitigate that flooding. And you see that around a lot of our rivers, where if you purchase a vacant lot near a river, please ask what's viable on that before you do so, because you might not be able to build anything on that property, specifically because we're trying to make sure that our properties are protected from things like that.
This is more of a comment about the question you asked. Yeah, we are living in a time where, you know, the two largest generations are together. You know, just the fact that I think millennials and Gen Zs are thinking in those terms versus, to be honest, maybe Gen X me in his 50s. You know, I don't often think about that, but I'm starting to think about that more often. Like, well, what does this really mean? I mean, we bought a car, you know, based on kind of like what would be easy for my wife to drive all the way to Ohio to teach at Defiance, what would get great gas mileage, but then what wouldn't, you know, you know, what would be forward thinking. So, I mean, I think that's kind of a fascinating point that we're at in history, where one generation's really thinking about the future in a way that is both positive and negative, in as much as, yeah, the climate's changing. Let's not pretend that it's not.
And I think that there's something really fascinating going on too across the country. I'm part of an organization called CNU, Congress for the New Urbanism, and that's a major focus is on building climate resilient cities. And I remember there was a study or maybe it was a news story that came out and said the most climate prepared city in the country, and they're like, drum roll, Duluth, Minnesota, and you're like, I never thought about moving to Duluth. Like, it was just never, but on there, all the Great Lakes cities, not all of them, but the majority of the Great Lakes cities were on the top of the list. And I think it's because of our location. So, knowing that we have that and being able to use that, I think is really important, because we do know that there is going to be a climate migration. It's already starting to occur. And so what does that look like long term, and being able to be ready for that, I think is really important.
Milwaukee was, I think, part of the new urbanism movement, at least when I lived there.
Yep.
The things that changed there.
Former Mayor Norquist, he was president.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. He wasn't loved in Madison, I don't think, but who cares? It's Madison, and I live there too. But any other questions? Yes, please. Your name?
I'm Kara Hackett. I live in Southwood Park. I have a question about thinking about urban infill and maybe some alternative housing types. We did a story about a year ago, or maybe 2 years now, about tiny houses and houses that are smaller than maybe 950 square feet. I think, currently, at least at the time the article was published in Allen County, you're not allowed to build a house even, but it's smaller than 950 square feet. And yet the city has a lot of vacant lots that could accommodate smaller houses and maybe help with homelessness. Or even just, anyone who is interested in living or reducing their home size. Do you know if the regulations have changed to allow smaller houses than 950 square feet? And is there any movement toward that in Allen County?
Yes, I would say that there's an expert in the room. So after there might be a better question to ask for sure. But I do know that there has been adjustments to ensure smaller footprints and houses are available.
Yeah, there was a recent to zoning code that allows for 700 square. So there's movement in that direction to accommodate a wider range. And that's so that's one option. And I love so many parts of this conversation. But, and I just want to add a little bit of texture maybe to some of the discussion about housing options and how important it is in the context of the comprehensive plan. I hope this comment sort of reminds us all of several of the things that have already been discussed, but we build a lot of houses. The all Allen plan is a countywide plan, so it respects that that's the place that we're planning. Within that place, there are other places like Fort Wayne, other town. So, and so the housing demand, where we build housing matters, right? So, building more housing, more options, building more density inside our city and in our neighborhoods, looking for those opportunities to broaden the spectrum of what's available, so that maybe you live in a neighborhood where predominant housing type is the 1,200 square foot single family detached house. So what else could be there? Well, imagining what else could be there is part of the solution. I think that starts to address and deal with resiliency question as well. So this whole element of filling in that spectrum of what's available, and not just filling it in with structures, but then thinking about where do those go, right? And how do they contribute to this thing we're talking about, our neighborhood, how it functions, and how those people yeah, the obvious question of group of people sort of cohabitating. So, sorry, I went way past the subject. So sorry. But, somebody asked me to open my mouth.
Go, yes, please.
Carmen, Cornelia Schultz.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think that fun enough to be that the people that are giving a lot of thought on these discussions, including myself, lives in a house with just one husband now. That's obscenely big, and those are all our homes. So a lot of neighborhood leaders live in historic homes. They used to be built as multi-generational homes. That's just the way that how we like to live. Like to have more than one room and maybe like one bathroom, one and 2.5 bathrooms, and so forth and so forth. So I think before we say the landlords or this should be built, it's the resources that I use is pretty much ridiculous. So I'm just not mentioning this in Germany ever. And we've been talking about this for 50 years. So for my generation, that's been a conversation for a very long time. And I would deploy in more dense urban areas like LA, California, regulations are. But second thing I want to mention might just be a smart market, but I do see more and more folks, investing in properties and renting them out to Airbnb.
Yeah.
And I'm all going like, isn't that isn't this awesome? It's like, looks so nice. It's the same people that then will also say, oh, we need to do something about affordable housing. So I think there's a big disconnect between all of us saying this is the right thing, but paying it so high. So I think we projected to, it's Indiana, it's such a conservative state, or there will be other regulations. But in reality, I think everyone that's here probably is contributing to the issue in some way.
Well, I was wondering, kind of enjoying opening all of this up to everyone just to talk. If Americans still suffer from like a frontierism that in Germany maybe is not there anymore, it's like, I live in Berlin. That's it. My cousin lives in Cologne, and we've learned to live not frugally but small. Like there are 3 of us. We don't need 10,000 square feet. In the United States, it feels like we have a 1,350 square foot home. Yes. And I'm trying to get rid of it. You know what? My wife is like, well, give us 4 years. Come on. There was just the 3 of us. And it didn't seem tight. I think if we had a 4th child, we might have thought about it. But then, again, I talked to friends in Europe, and they're like, 1,350 square feet. I mean, you guys are living well. So I over time, I'm hoping that Americans will, youth, as they grow older, will remember maybe we don't need quite as much space.
Away from one zone, where you could, make like some small changes maybe to the layout of your home.
Right.
And then have another family.
Yes.
Which now you would not, especially Southwood Park.
Yeah, well, we can't do it.
You got 3 properties.
Yes.
Yeah. With your homeowners association.
Yeah, well, again, what I love about the neighborhood, and I see this in the 05 too, is that you get this great, wonderful diversity in, types of families and ages of people. Like our child now is at Ball State. All of those kids that I saw playing out they're all off in college or moved on. Their parents are still living there. Younger people have moved in. Now there's a whole new other group of kids running up and down the street. I'm sure they'll eventually tear up my yard as every other child did because it's in the middle of the street. But I mean, I liked that diversity of it. But then I wondered, if there was, if downtown was more affordable, I would then leave, then there would be a house available to a younger family to have that same experience. But now it's sort of like, can we afford to leave? Can we afford to move, to where we want to? It's not that there are worse places to be stuck, but I feel kind of like we're just stuck,
Well, I just want to add to this, that when TV was originally developed and there was a lot of community input, there was quite a bit of talk having a retirement, like a yellow village, be in TV. Well, that didn't materialize, but that's something, and I think there's a big demand for aging in place. Maybe not like, exactly in the same street, but at least in the
city.
And I don't see anyone really making any effective push in that direction.
Kevin, I left that town. It's been hinted at a couple times, but I want to ask explicitly. Is there any talk of eliminating or outzoning residential zones completely? Like, if people, it would increase density and affordability kind of thing, by, having multi-family units, but also if you can have jobs and resources and third places in your neighborhood, you don't have to drive across town to, and that's another cost that's eliminated, which frees up land for housing.
I think we're seeing it's a slow thought, but it's a very well thought out change. For example, there's a new zoning classification in the last couple of years called urban corridor, and the idea behind that is to have a mixed use closest to the street. So it's an adjustment. It's not a complete removal of an entire zoning classification, because that's it's not something that just happens. But it's something that we can do, and we can monitor, and we can make adjustments. And I know that the zoning classifications go through regular review at the county level, because they ran through the Department of Planning Services. So.
And I think the last housing study that I saw, which has been made public regarding, I think is specifically focused on housing downtown and housing in Southeast Fort Wayne, called for a lot more dense housing and a lot more like multifamily development and whatnot. So that would require adjustments to some of the R1 zoning, I think, and how we're looking at that, or variances or something to that effect. But it'll still be a residentially zoned area to directly answer the direct question.
Yeah, I have another question. So, one thing I've thought about recently is land value tax. Instead of the way we do property taxes during homes, that like you can have an apartment lot downtown that should be worth several $1 million, but it's only worth $30,000 because $300,000. And you're not paying as much tax, there's fewer houses because you underdevelop this line that you're surrounding, basically. Or all the missing teeth in south side of the white, like people are large landowners are holding onto these empty lots that pay property tax because there's nothing on them. But if they could be used at a higher value, make it a tax. And maybe people that should also tax more just by improving their own home. I feel like, it's a punishment. What's increase the value of their home, we have store in front or an ADU. Is there any, sorry, one question? No. Is there any, chance of moving to land value taxes?
That's probably a conversation maybe after, just because there's a lot more to get into there. But I think what we're starting to see, and it doesn't necessarily answer the question directly, but I hope it gets to the kind of the heart of it, is we're seeing areas where we had a lot of missing teeth be used now for their higher and best use. locations in downtown recently, there's been a couple of places that were previously service parking lots, and now they're seeing development. We're looking at places, even on some of our corridors that were surface lots, and now they're starting to see redevelopment. And I think that, we referred to All in Allen a few times. I think that's a really important document to go back to and look at once it's adopted. That's the new comprehensive plan, and that also pursues additional infill and strategies to support higher and best use on some of our current open land. But I think, if we can certainly have that, I want to be able to have that conversation, afterwards. I think that's okay. So.
Any last questions? Yes, please.
From a community engagement standpoint, or is the city considering ways to deal with these? Because I know that's gotta be part of the conversation, that not everybody's here having this conversation with wanting to see healthy neighbor, or they feel like their neighborhood is healthy with less multifamily housing, let's say, or less small houses and things like that. So what are you guys thinking about from a community engagement standpoint to defeat that?
Talk about community engagement, Dan.
Yeah. So community. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No. And this is one of the most important things is whenever you think you've, when it comes to community engagement, is ask and ask again and keep getting to the point. And it may take a couple times asking that question. NIMBYism is going to happen no matter where you are, and you're also going to have YIMBYs too, which is yes in my backyard. So you have a little bit of mixture of both. I think that it has to start with some level of education, being able to explain at a level that's understood, and you're not necessarily trying to convince somebody. You're trying to get them to understand why this is important for them too. So engagement has to be about meeting them where they are and being able to walk through those questions, and then hopefully they get to the point where they're understanding why building additional housing in the neighborhood is really important, or building multiple opportunities for housing types or typologies is really important in the neighborhood too. So there's
Yeah. And I think, so the thing is, NIMBYism or just people being loud because they're passionate about a thing happens on both sides of issues. So, I mean, I think even we had a recent outreach about streets. And there were people who were just like, how dare you make my street smaller? And then there are people who are, how dare you not make the street smaller and safer? You know what I mean? It's literally, and they're both mad and coming at you at the same time. So what Dan spoke to about education, I noticed that when we were in that room, that there were people who were adamantly opposed to making the street slower, smaller, safer on the front end, who started to nod by the time we got to, this makes it safer for the kids to cross the street. This can help reduce fatalities on the street. This can help, et cetera, et cetera. But there were still people in that room who said, I don't care. I still want my street fast because it's more convenient for me and I don't want 2 minutes added to my commute, no matter what. So I think part of me wants to kick it back in some ways and say, a lot of the time, we can do so much, we can reach out so much. And I'm really proud of the fact that the city of Fort Wayne is making efforts to reach out early and to try people with true opportunity for input and to influence and change some of what's happening. Because I think we as a city slacked off on that for a period of time. Maybe I should, whatever I said it. But there was a point where we were just where community engagement felt like awareness, be aware of the project. Now there's actually room and time to provide meaningful input about the project and to build up community, hopefully support and buy-in and understanding of why some of the decisions that are being made and how they can help us really fine-tune those decisions to make sure that they're right and appropriate for the communities in which they're embedded. So having said that, one of the things I'm personally working on are these one-on-one workshops or one-on-one guides that help to let people know how they can engage in what they're already equipped to do, So we have one that is Civic Engagement 101, where if somebody wants to know how to write an op-ed, how to provide a very impactful testimonial at a board or hearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I will come out and teach that skill set to them free of charge. Their taxpayer dollars have already paid for it. You know, so we're hoping that equipping people with the skill sets in order to do that work will help get people out, and hopefully they'll teach one another. But it's up to you guys too. You know, we can engage, but then if you're really firmly in support of a project, and you're saying, yes, I absolutely want that here, tell your friends, you know, get them to write letters of support, get them to come out and promote those types of projects. Because a lot of the time, the people who are angry on either pole are the ones that we hear from the most. And so if there's not that wave of support coming in as well, it can be tough to move some things forward without that public buy-in and consensus.
Since you mentioned slow, safe streets, thinking that, it seems to me like a public health issue. But right now, it seems like if we want to make our streets slower and safer, like we need like 50% or 100% of the neighborhood residents to like buy into it, which feels like
Or just in good
like things that we more top-down push, like from maybe the city, but also the police, like anyone who's in charge of public health. Why aren't they pushing that? All speed limits and the design speeds are 20 miles an hour in all the neighborhoods. Like that would solve so many fatal crashes. And like, why are they pushing that? Why does it have to be up to the neighbors to say, we do want this, and then any neighbor can say, I don't want this, so if fatal crashes are fine. Well,
I think that's
To both
the-
ends.
that's a both and. You have people that will say that, and so it's really important. You know, I go back to part of building community is building relationships with people in your community, and that's really kind of the essential point of it. And so by when it comes to street design or land use or things like that, or building a new park or things like that, if you do it alone or somebody comes in and does it for you, it's the I'm going to try to mix analogies, so I won't do that. But it's the idea is, how do you start to build groups of people working together to solve problems or create solutions? And I think that's really create solutions that are going to be positive for the neighborhood. So, putting in a stop sign, I know requires a certain percentage of people that live, and I'm not in public works, so I'm not going to give exact percentages here. But I think it's really important to understand that, if I want one, but the person across the street doesn't, and the city only listens to one person, we should try to build a relationship with the person across the street and bring them along with us.
I guess what I'm saying is, why don't the police know? Why doesn't the city? Like, why aren't they saying, your street is unsafe? Like, maybe you oppose it, but we want to make your street safer. We're going to work on this project. We're going to oppose things, we're going to like try to get you in, but we want to, like I want the city, I want the police, I want someone to drive this and say, this is a public issue. We're not going to leave it up to neighbors who might not care.
So we are, and this is, we're a city that's 110 square miles. It's a large city. We have a lot of roads, a lot of lane miles, and I want to make sure I don't go too far off topic here. But the idea is we do have priorities we are working on each year. We have a really great public works team. I want to give a shout out to Kyle and Patrick and several other folks down there, Nick, Gerald, and everybody, Sean. And for example, one of the projects we were recently working on, they were all at that meeting, saying this is a project that we would like to see accomplished, but we want to make sure the community is engaged in the design. So to say that we're not doing it would be unfair. I think it's we have such a large city, we can't do it all across the city all at once. So it has to be done in phases, and it has to be done thoughtfully and making sure the community is a part of it. So, certainly there's streets that rise to the occasion. And then I think there's streets that they've been measuring and monitoring for a long time. We work with a group called NERC, Northeast Indiana Regional Coordinating Council. Well, I can't believe I got that. But we work all together. And so they are constantly looking at streets and needs and things like that too. So it's a collaborative effort, and being able to prioritize projects that we can get done kind of sooner is the first step. So
Mhm.
I mean, it's an interesting philosophical point, though,
Yeah.
which is, what the state controls a lot of things,
They do.
particularly speed limits around schools, speed limits even in cities. Uh, and you know, I've lived in Wisconsin, I've lived in California, I've lived here, and you know, there are times where I think I would totally agree with like, just do it.
Mhm.
And then I know the backfire is going to be, you know, really litigious. So, yeah, I think it's just trying to convince people, look, this is a really good idea. And then hopefully you get like that 75% that says, yeah, okay. And then you go, well, this is democratic values. So,
Yeah. And it builds
Right.
buy-in to the project too,
right.
when you start to get people involved.
yes.
Well, I do want to just mention this one example because it happened on my street where we have 99% buy-in and 6 years discussing the same problem. And then one neighbor calls responsible party at the city and gets shut down. So part of the, I think, to Kevin's point too, is that the people in the neighborhoods that are engaged have a life and have a job and they don't get paid to be engaged. Right? And so they're very busy and they try their very best. Whereas other people, that's just the nature of the piece, do get paid full time. And so the problem ends up who has the longer worth, so to speak, and yet then there's a lot of frustration for those people that have been engaged in neighborhood where you don't ever see a result in your engagement. And then it doesn't matter how big the city is or what great project is happening someplace else. Because the level of frustration is just, enormous, and then that leads to civic leaders, so to speak, consuming all of their people time, city employees, because it's a flurry of different ends, non-stop, nothing gets resolved, and we feel very stagnant. So in a way to change that gridlock, like how Karen says, city sometimes just put on your big board hands and do it, and then we be all there, because people who want them, like, they're not engaged in at the meeting after meeting after. Bit of a catch-22, just want to push back that we're not trying and not hard enough to have consensus. It's just not possible.
I guess I'm curious, are there any examples where this has happened before, like where a neighborhood has proposed, or like the city has just seen a need for something and then stepped in and changed something without having the neighbors create a consensus? Do you guys know, that's just off the top of my head, but I just want to.
And that's certainly I can connect to, I'm sure there's examples, so I can.
I would just be curious to know, like what would warrant that? Like, is there a public health measure that at some point tips in the city says, you know, it doesn't matter what the neighbors love, we're gonna do it no matter what? But I'd just be curious about that measure.
I can answer this question because when you see, miles and miles and miles of new sidewalks along major roadways like Illinois Road or Washington Center Road, I want to venture to say that not everybody in the Jordan subdivision should put a sidewalk in front of the subdivision. That was a decision that was made by the people in power. So it's just like this.
It's the messiness of democracy. Let's just be honest about it, you know.
Some examples of things where that were done, and this is again with my previous hat on, without people feeling like where there was outcry. I'll say after it happened, or I think specifically without mentioning a specific structure, about the demolition of some structures that were older, even if some felt they were historic, but weren't necessarily designated that manner of thing. I mean, so that's happened a few times in the city's history. And typically, from what I saw, from the examples that I remember, there was community engagement where there was very little community participation or input. And the participation came after the demolition was announced. So there are examples like that where afterward it's just like people were announcing it to the neighborhood, really saying, aren't we so glad it's coming down? Because the 2 to 3 people who showed up said, tear it down. you know? And then as soon as they say it's getting torn down, all of a sudden there's this outcry of no, 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 save my building or that history or or something to that effect. So, I mean, just to answer that question of those are examples where engagement input on the front end, even if you can't show up, take the time to write a letter. And have 50 letters as opposed to that one email, that one voice, those 2 people who showed up. That matters. People do pay attention to those numbers.
I was gonna say the idea of the new county jail. That has been kind of that's been fascinating to watch, particularly since they wanted to dump it in Southeast, and people came. There was a great coalition of people, not just from Southeast, but from all over, which I thought was fascinating. To say, okay, well, wait, why are we doing this? Why are we putting it down here? People that were actually reading the court order, where the court doesn't say we need a new jail. The county decided we needed to build a new jail. From that one idea of like, do we really need to build a new jail, or do we need to think about law enforcement and incarceration differently? Are we just stacking people in jail? What we should be thinking about, well, what does 21st century law enforcement and look like? What does 21st century what does the 21st century court look like? And not from a design point of view, but from a very practical sociological point of view, so that has been, as long as I've lived here, that has been I don't know, probably that and trash were the 2 things that I never thought I'd see, but yeah, it can be messy. And I've lived in places where 99 people say, yeah, let's do this. And then one person makes a call downtown and suddenly it's like, wait, what? How did this get messed up? And that's just, I hate to say it, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, but it's the messiness of democracy, and that's the really corrupt part of that messiness. That one person can have that sort of influence for a problem like that. But I feel that frustration, both as a person who lives here in Fort Wayne and lived in cities, and also as a person who had been an activist before. So.
And I think that part of that is the messiness of democracy is really important, because if it's one person with their idea and this is what should be done, you're not taking into account the other 98, 99 people in the room. So it is really important to have different people with different ideas coming together and creating a solution that's going to make a positive impact, because sometimes what your one idea was changes, and it actually changes for the better. And that's the great part about democracy, is it can actually be improved.
And that's one of the things the solutions journalism network builds on, is that idea that journalists identify social issues and social problems and things like that, and then search for a solution, whether it's a compromise or whether it's what some other community is doing. And it very much ties into that. I mean, and it's always one of the other pillars of solutions journalism is that it's never enough. It's never going to completely solve a problem. You have to lay out the limitations of what it is you're trying to propose. But it's all about that messiness, and it's a collaborative. It's a great thing.
I think that's about it. This has been wonderful to be a part of.
Thank you.
And, if you guys have any other questions, I don't know how long you guys are going to think.
Stick around for a minute.
A little bit, yeah. Thank you, Fred.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.